Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Calvin Sneed. Calvin is known to many Chattanoogans as a familiar face on local television news. He broke a lot of barriers as he worked his way from photographer to main anchor on the 6 p.m. newscast. Now retired, Calvin keeps a hand in broadcasting while pursuing his passion, bridge hunting. Calvin, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before we find out why photographing bridges has become a pursuit of yours, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
Coffee.
Yeah, what do you put in it?
Oh, it can't taste like coffee.
Oh, well, then it's not coffee.
No. It can't taste like coffee. It's got to taste like anything but coffee. It's got some caramel in it. And it's my favorite, though. My favorite is caramel macchiato. Oh, my God. Are you kidding me? That stuff is like from heaven.
Yeah, it's all sugar.
Yeah, exactly. Like I need sugar, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, yeah. 70 years old, and I still need sugar. Yeah.
So every morning you get up, you make coffee, and then you load. Well, let me rephrase that. Every morning you get up, you put the caramel and the sugar and a thing, and a touch of coffee.
Well, actually, when I first get up in the morning, the dogs have to go outside, and then second, I turn on the TV. And I'll just look at the headlines and see, oh my God, what am I going to be facing? What's going on in the world today?
Gets kind of depressing.
Yeah, just horrible. Then I sit down and drink the coffee. After I make the coffee and drink coffee, I'm much better. I've mellowed out.
So I've been wanting to have you on the podcast. I'm so glad you're here because, not only have you had a long history in broadcast television, but you really had a barrier-breaking history in broadcast television, particularly in East Tennessee.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
That's what I want to talk about. I want to go through your career, how you started, where you are now. But I know you grew up in Upper East Tennessee, Kingsport.
Mm-hmm. Kingsport, Tennessee.
Went to Dobbins-Bennett.
Right. You tell people that you're from Upper East Tennessee, and they look at you like, oh, yeah. Well, I'm from Kingsport, Tennessee. And I'm like, that's near Bristol, the state line, with Virginia. Yeah. That's nice. And then I go, it's close to Johnson City. And they're like, oh, yeah, Johnson City. That's where the school is. Yeah, that's where the medical school is. Yeah, I know all about it. I know all about Johnson City. Everybody knows about Johnson City, but they don't know about the other two.
Yeah, it's the Tri-Cities.
Right. And I loved it up there. I mean, it was a perfect place to raise a family, and I was in a good family.
Did your family move there a long time ago, or did you move there when you were a kid?
Well, yeah, I was about 5 years old. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh, wow. I was born in Toledo.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really? Okay. Yeah, a couple of Buckeyes.
Yeah.
I don't know why my mother, her sisters, she had sisters in Cleveland, so I think she was just visiting, and all of a sudden, hey, water broke. Yep. Got to go to the hospital. And then there 6 hours later, there's this little screaming kid. But we moved to Kingsport. My mother's family is from Middle Tennessee, from southern Middle Tennessee, from south of Nashville,
like Columbia area.
Columbia, Shelbyville.
Yeah.
That area, Lewisburg. They're from Marshall County, which is Lewisburg, and my father's family is all from Upper East Tennessee. They were all from the Kingsport area, and they met at Tennessee State University. Back then, it was Tennessee A&I.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Agricultural and Industrial University. But yeah, they met there, and got married, and then moved to Kingsport. And his parents were there, and they just moved back there. And it was just, like I said, it was just a dream come true for my mother because she was raised on a farm, she and her 15 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. I love telling this story about my mother's brothers and sisters. 16 kids, 4 sets of twins.
4 sets of twins?
4 sets of twins.
What was in the water?
I don't know what was in my granddad. That's what we need to figure out. But he
well, obviously two of something.
Well, yeah. He there were two identical sets, one paternal set, which was a boy-girl set, and then another fraternal set of two girls.
Wow.
That just doesn't happen. You don't find fraternal sets of twins that are of the same sex.
Very seldom.
Yeah. And we would go to twins conventions, and everybody would look at us and go, "You're kidding, really?"
Now, did your mother have a bunch? You're not.
My mother's one of the twins. She's one of the identical sets.
But how many siblings do you have?
One other one.
So your mother grew up as one of 15. So
right.
I'm
yeah.
having two.
And don't yell, but I hear they skip a generation. So I'm just got my eyes closed to that.
Now you went to high school at Dobbins-Bennett, but
Dobbins-Bennett High School, yes.
Was that when the schools merged? Because wasn't there a segregation issue?
I lived through desegregation.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit.
I lived through that. I went 6 years to an all-black elementary high school in Kingsport, and then 6 years or 3 years to an integrated. And I say integrated, it was actually desegregated. There's a difference between, I want to explain that too. There's a difference between integration and desegregation. An integrated school is where minorities come into the school and you don't close the school down. The school stays there. It's always there. It's just now got black students and white students. Desegregated schools are the schools where you take all the black kids, you send them to the formerly all-white school, and then you close down the former black school. That's what happened in all of Upper East Tennessee when I was growing up. All of those 15, 16 all-black schools in Tri-Cities and Southwest Virginia and Upper East Tennessee, they closed every single one of them down in 1965. Dobbins-Bennett got a waiver because their new school wasn't ready yet. And they got a waiver from the Department of Education to desegregate the next year, 1966. So it was a culture shock.
Yeah.
And what was even worse is the fact that my chosen profession, I've always wanted to be on TV, always. The minute I sat down, I was growing up in Middle Tennessee watching WSM and WLAC and WSIX TV in Nashville. I knew that's what I wanted to do.
So that's the bug that bit you.
Yeah, but I wanted to be an actor.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't want to go into news. I wanted to be an actor. And a guidance counselor, God rest her soul, Verna Ruth Abbott, she's not with us anymore, but she took that to mean that I wanted to go into news. So WKPT radio in Kingsport was where everybody who wanted to go on television, they had just gotten a TV station, could go and be that. You could actually do that. You could practice that. But it was news. It wasn't an actor. When I grew up, all we had was Bill Cosby and Diane Cannon and some of the background black people that were on TV back in the day.
Yeah, but Bill Cosby and Diane Cannon were the first to star. Diane Carroll.
Yes, Julia was the show that she was on.
I remember that show.
But, there were no blacks on the news at all. But if you went to WKPT, you were going to do news. You weren't going to be an actor. So I think if I had stayed in acting and kept on with that and moved to California, I'd still be at waiting tables. Waiting on the call. Yeah. I'd still be doing that.
Well, it sounds like you chose the right path.
Well, she chose it for me.
Yeah.
My teacher, she pushed me in that direction. And I got on at WKPT and I worked there for 2 years in high school. And then, here we go, the big University of Tennessee. Had to graduate, right? So UT had this new program that they were starting in the College of Communications that they didn't have before. This was 1972. And it was called a co-op program. And basically what you did was you go to school a quarter, you work a quarter.
I was on the quarter system there.
Yeah. And the co-op system, they had that in the College of Engineering forever. I mean, they'd have engineering students. Yeah, they'd have engineering students that would go out to these sites, and go to these firms and work for them, and get to learn the business and everything. So they decided to, Don Heilemann, the dean.
Oh, yeah.
decided, well, I wonder if we could do that here. I wonder if we could do that program with us and kind of broaden our perspective. I was one of 2 students they chose for that program. It was basically an internship is what it amounted to.
So you'd go to school a couple quarters and then take another quarter and go work wherever you're going to work.
Well, yeah. I had work quarters and then school quarters. My school quarters would be at UTK in Knoxville. My work quarters, oddly enough, would be at WTVC-TV in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
So that's what brought you to Chattanooga.
In 1972. And what a trip that was. When I first came over the ridge, I was 18 years old, never been to Chattanooga. Oh, I'd heard, Lookout Mountain, from the Dr. King speech that mentions, Lookout Mountain. So I knew where it was. We came over the ridge cut, me and my co-op advisor, and I looked out from Seminole Drive, from the top of the ridge cut as you're coming down to the bottom of the ridge cut. You look out to the west, and all I could see was just this haze of fog. I couldn't see any people, any houses, nothing, no buildings. You couldn't even see downtown. But off in the distance, Lookout Mountain rose up out of the fog. And then he told me about the smog problem.
Yeah.
Chattanooga was the most polluted city in the country. And he says, when you come here, you're going to learn that. You're going to know that it's hard to breathe here. People have respiratory problems here. They finally fixed that problem, but just imagine an 18-year-old kid never having seen a place, and that's what they have to see. That's their first impression.
And what was your impression? I mean, you look at that and you're going, boy, have I made a mistake?
I'm like, okay, does the sun ever come out here? I mean, what do they do at night? Is it this foggy at night?
Yeah.
And oddly enough, it cleared up at night. So but I was scared. I didn't know what I'd gotten into. I left my comfort zone.
Yeah. So you took the co-op opportunity at WTVC. What were you doing?
Oh, my goodness. I was a news photographer. I was a news reporter. I did everything at Channel 9. They were at the Golden Gateway Shopping Center.
Which is now where Blue Cross had
Blue
the
Shield.
buildings and actually sold them to the county.
Right, yeah.
The vocational school.
Right, yeah. It's going to become a school now. Again, because it was a school for me when I first got here. And so, but I met some wonderful, wonderful people. I mean, and one of the first people I met, God bless her, Miss Marcia. I immediately took a liking to Miss Marcia, and then
how could you not?
Well, yeah, I mean, my God, it wasn't romper room, but she did fun time, with the kids, and everything. And she had that aura about her, that air about her that, this is my mother. If I ever need a mother, it's right now, a new person in a new place. And I just gravitated to her, because of her personality. And everybody, I found out later, everybody does that with Marcia. Yeah. I mean, she's just a wonderful, wonderful person. And I love her dearly.
Yeah.
I love her dearly.
So you come here as a student and you're a photographer, reporter. Mm-hmm. Am I remembering this correctly that were you the first African-American reporter on the air in Chattanooga?
No. We'll get to the first part in just a minute. Gary Wardlaw was reporting here, but my claim to fame was I was taught that if you didn't get to the scene of the wreck or the robbery or the bank robbery or the mayhem or the stabbing or whatever, the other stations are going to beat you to it. And by the time you get there, the scene's going to be all cleaned up. And they're going to be looking at you like, you're late, So you got to get there first. So the minute I would hear that stuff, and there was this running joke, Leon Webb was telling me about it. He says, whenever we heard boom, 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 running down the hall, that's Calvin. Everybody would get in the doors and they would just kind of stand out of the way, and I would just race by them with a camera. And I would jump down to the first landing. I didn't take the stairs. I would jump down to the first landing in the studio station lobby. Then I would jump down the second flight, and then I was out the door. It took me, I could be out that door in less than 20 seconds. And everybody would just stand back. Leon Webb told me, he was a station manager that recently passed away, but he said that we knew we were going to get that story when you came out the door. He said, I've never seen that much enthusiasm out of one person to get to the scene of something and get it on film.
How did you transition so quickly from wanting to be an actor to really embracing journalism? Because I know your counselor said this is what you're going to do, but at some point, are you not sitting like, I don't like this, or did you just fall in love with it and get bit?
I absolutely fell in love with it.
Yeah.
I had something to do that was meaningful, something that helped people, something that gave them information. And you can't do that. You can act and do that as an actor, but you got to be really, really good at it.
Yeah.
And you got to pick your roles and they have to fit you.
And you're not always writing your own words.
Right. Exactly. But by the same token, I could work into news. Mm-hmm. I could become a part of news. You can't become a part of acting because you just have to give up yourself and step into this role as somebody else. Mm-hmm. It's like an out-of-body experience. News is you, 100%. You're telling people what's going on in the world around them. And I learned really quickly that it's much more effective getting your point across doing news, especially if you can communicate. Communication is the whole thing. Mm-hmm. That's what it's all about. It's like you've got to be a good communicator. You've got to be a good listener. You've got to be able to relate to what people are talking about, what their goals are, what their ambitions are, what their frailties are. You have to step into that. And it takes a special kind of person to just be able to do that. And once you've got it, it's going to stay with you the rest of your life. I learned that quickly. It took me, maybe I came to that realization in about 2 weeks of working here back in 1972. And it stuck with me. It's with me today.
As someone who has known you a long time now, and frankly, and I think I've told you this, I first became aware of you in 1980, 81 when you were doing weekends at WATE. And I was sitting I was in my dorm watching you on television. But to your point of that's who you become, that's been your persona for 50 years now.
Yeah, 55. Yeah. 55 years. And everybody that's good at what they do, and you don't have to brag about it. You don't have to brag that you're good. You just are. Mm-hmm. And, it's not like a swagger, that kind of knowing that you're good. It's a togetherness kind of swagger. It's like being somebody's next door neighbor, and you've got this picket fence out in the backyard, mm-hmm. and you meet out there. You'll see him working in his yard or her working in the yard. You go over and speak to him, and you get up a conversation with them, and next thing you know, you're talking about world events. You're talking about what happened at city council. You're talking about the school board. You're talking about little Johnny is he's growing up, and he's starting fights, and everything, and I got to get him out of that, It's relating to people.
And you and I talk a lot about local television, and back in its heyday, one of the things that I used to say was, we're being invited every night mm-hmm. into someone's living room. Mm-hmm. Truth and honesty is so important. Likability is important because you don't invite everyone into your house.
Right. And they're either going to like you or they're going to hate you. It's that simple. The first time they see you, I kind of like that guy.
Yeah.
And if they can't explain that, you've got a friend for life.
Well, one of the things that I used to insist on is that the good personalities jump through the screen. Wasn't something you could particularly identify why, mm-hmm. but their essence came through the screen, and that's that likability factor.
It can be subtle, too.
Absolutely.
It can be very subtle.
And you spent the majority of your career at WTBC.
25 years.
But you had a lot of stops. So
I had a bunch of stops before that.
Let's just go through the linear fashion of that. You're doing the co-op. You're graduating from Tennessee. So what happens with your co-op and where you go next?
Oh my gosh, I had 1 year, 1975, that I was just a vagabond. My co-op had ended after 3 years here at Channel 9, so I had to go back to Knoxville and go back to UT so I could graduate. And I was offset a year because working a quarter and going to school a quarter obviously sets you behind. Mm-hmm. They let me take proficiency tests at UT to get caught up. So in other words, you take classes in courses that you are very, very good at, that you're proficient in, and they just give you a grade, and then 3 or 4 hours. So I got caught up that way, but I was still a year behind. 1975, I came back after the co-op ended, and I got on at WBIR radio in Knoxville. And it was still working through school. I didn't get paid a whole lot. I mean, they would give you hours instead of pay. And so I got on at WBI. I was writing copy for their all news station, their AM station. And I was also writing copy for the new news that Carl Williams got to read.
Oh, wow.
On the air in Knoxville, Channel 10. So that lasted a couple of months.
Yeah.
Because I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere. And I was able to get on at WIVK radio in Knoxville doing and I'm still going to school now. I'm going to school in the daytime, in the morning, up until about 3:00. Well, they got me a job at WIVK reading the news in the afternoon, after 9 drive time. And the guy that was doing sports, I had a chance to get to know him real well because we kind of bantered back and forth. Guy by the name of Bob Kessling.
That's a familiar name. Has he done anything?
Only the voice of the Vols. Yeah. Only taken over from John Ward, who was a good friend of mine. I miss John quite a bit. Kessling was doing the sports. I did that for a couple of months,
mm-hmm.
and then I through Dr. Howard, who was good friends with John Reese at WATE. He got me an interview with John Reese because they had an opening for somebody to do the news in the morning for Good Morning Tennessee. Basically 2 cut-ins, one at 6:15, one at 6:45, and then you went into the Today Show at 7:00. They were NBC, and you did one cut-in at 7:25 and then one at 8:25. That would work into my schedule because my first class was at 9:00. So as soon as I got off the air at 8:30, I was in the car going to UT to find a place to park. Yeah. To make my 9:00 class. So I got on there. They hired me to do that. And then a month later, after I got hired, this is all in 1975. A month after I got hired, they decided, we need somebody to do weekend sports. Mike Thurman was the sports director, but I would be the assistant, his assistant. I would shoot his sports stuff, during the week. Still going to school, still working at WIVK, and I was now doing this and trying to study.
Were you doing this mainly for your career or also the money? I mean, students
there was no money
work.
in it. There was no. I mean, it was peanuts.
You had, some spending money.
Very, very little.
Very little. So you're doing it mainly.
It would be a lot easier to afford a Hershey candy bar now than then.
How important was doing all that to your career?
Extremely important, extremely, because first of all, it made me learn deadlines. You've got to be at a certain place at a certain time. And of course, I carried the deadline thing, through up to that point anyway, but it was never more emphasized than having to get to class, making those cut-ins on time, getting there because, hey, at 7:00, network is coming and you've got to have all your stuff ready to go. And in a row. So when you sit down, you just sit down and do it, and then you go on to something else.
The clock doesn't wait on you.
No. It's going. And if you're not there, they sit on dead air.
So you got more than your foot in the door at WATE. You're doing cut-ins.
I got both feet, my hands, my ear,
You start weekend anchoring too?
That came after I graduated. In 77. I graduated UT in 77. Then they hired me full time.
How long were you at ATE?
10 years. And I got to tell you, it was the most fun I've ever had in my life because those guys, Hal Wanzer, the news director, and John Reese, the program director, back then in those days, news came under programming. Mm-hmm. News was a function of programming, just like syndicated programming.
News was a separate department.
Right. It wasn't its own department back then. John Reese did Hal Wanzer interviewed you, but John Reese did the hiring. And they hired me full time after I graduated. And I got to tell you, at that point, I became the first African-American anchor in East Tennessee.
It's a pretty big deal.
Well, I didn't think about it then. I didn't think that. Of course, now we had our problems. We had the local. Well, how shall I put it? Less urban informed people. There's another word to call them, but I'm not gonna do it. Just take your pick. Use your imagination. And they didn't like the fact that I was there.
Yeah, would the station get feedback? Or?
Oh yeah. Calvin got feedback.
Yeah, really?
Calvin. Oh yeah.
And this is before email, so the feedback you're getting are either phone calls or letters.
Or the crosses burned on the lawn.
Really?
Yeah. There was one cross burned on the lawn at WATE.
At the station?
Yeah. Right in front of Greystone. And the janitor caught it and called John Reese, the station manager, and told him about it. And of course, they immediately got it and set it aside. But we had to file a police report. There was a police report.
Wait, how old are you at that point?
Oh my God. Oh, I want to say 22 maybe.
So you're 22, you're progressing in your career, and something like that happened. What's that do to you?
Well, I had been so accepted by everybody at what I did that I didn't really have time to sit down and look at it as a black person doing it, because everybody else was looking at me as a person doing it. And it was a person that they liked.
Yeah.
That they could identify with, that they could communicate with. They felt like I was talking to them. And it was just like I was saying a few minutes ago. They accepted me for what I was,
right,
not for what I looked like.
Yeah.
And it just kind of blew over and just became the running joke after that. It's like, Calvin, what are you going to do if they come burn another one? Well, I'll probably go out there and toast marshmallows on it.
Well, and frankly, Calvin, that's been my impression of how you handle things over the years. You are very much I am what I am. I'm doing my job. And if you got a problem with me, I'm not going to let it bother me. That's your problem.
Right. Yeah. It's like, dude, I got bigger things to worry about.
Yeah.
I got a story to get on the air at 6 o'clock, Yeah. So I'd love to sit here and talk to you, but in fact, I will talk to you, but don't be surprised if I'm working a little bit over here while I'm doing that. But Knoxville was fun because they moved me from all of that part-time work. When I became full-time, they put me, they moved me off sports, weekend sports. I continued to do sports, though, because I love doing sports. And Mike Thurman was my big brother.
Yeah.
He was a big brother figure to me, and he realized that. I would go and cover all of the UT sports things with Mike on Saturday, football games and basketball games.
You didn't enjoy that?
I hated every minute. I did, absolutely hated it. I mean, the records were just terrible. No, it was fun. It was fun because I grew up in the Johnny Majors era, the Don DeVoe era, the Ray Mears era, the Ernie and Bernie show. That was my.
I still insist that Johnny Majors was probably the best post-game interview of any coach there ever was. Just
Channel 6, WATE, used to, not only did they run the Johnny Majors show, they recorded it in our studio.
Yeah.
On Saturday night when I was anchoring the news.
Yeah. After the game.
Yeah. So they would come in there and they would sit down and do the show after the game. If it was an afternoon game, they were in there by 7 o'clock, ready to tape that show, he and John Ward. And Majors sometimes would bring his kid with him, John Jr., an absolute, and I'll say this, and I don't care if he ever hears this, he was an absolute terror. We had to babysit him in the newsroom. And the newsroom at Channel 6 back then was in the basement of Greystone on Broadway. And he would get into everything. He would pull papers down on the floor. He would knock stuff off the counter, and
is that what got you out of sports?
No.
No?
I moved into a new job. That's what got, because I stayed in sports. I still have that.
Well, and if it's the new job, I think you're doing weekends, but there's a new opportunity that comes up that really cements you as a personality.
Well, now, before we even get to that, let's move into the first African-American anchor to anchor a newscast in a main newscast, 6 and 11.
And I didn't mean to gloss that over, but
that I looked back at that, and I didn't realize that it had happened. The only time it really hit me that milestone had been reached was back during a Black History Month, years later, that the Knoxville News-Sentinel a reporter called me. They were doing firsts in Knoxville. And they went back and noticed that I had been the first African-American to co-anchor a newscast, to even anchor a newscast in all of East Tennessee, in Chattanooga, Knoxville, and Nashville. Of course,
it's pretty incredible.
I said I meant Tri-Cities. Nashville had its own set of African-Americans that were prominent, and anchored shows. Memphis, the same way.
Yep.
But East Tennessee didn't have that. And I realized after they did that little article that I was the first.
That's pretty incredible.
It was mind-blowing to me. And somebody actually had to sit down and explain to me what that meant years later. Because I just went in, sat down, and did it. It didn't make a difference to me. I was having fun. I mean, I'm communicating.
In the present, at that time, it really didn't mean that you were doing your job.
Right.
But now,
right.
40, 50 years later, what does it mean to you?
We got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
We still have a lot of work to do. And it's not just African Americans. This business that I stayed in for 55 years still has a lot of work to do. And the reason I say that is because even today, I'm still the only African American male on the air in East Tennessee doing news. Still.
The only anchor, or
the only African American anchor? Yes.
So in Knoxville, in Tri-Cities, and Chattanooga, because you're doing some work with Channel 3 right now,
right? And this is main anchor. This is main anchor.
Main anchor.
This is 6 and 11.
Yeah.
Kind of and noon and things like that.
Which are the main shows, which is what anchors aspire to be on.
Right. Right. And we've got now Nashville. You go to Nashville, they have an African American. I think the last time I checked, WSMV has an African American male, I believe, that anchors news and main newscasts there. I know Memphis does. Every station in Memphis does, and then I think another station in Nashville has the same thing. And I'm not talking just. I'm speaking right now strictly male, not female.
Why do you think that is? Is it on management for not pursuing African-American males, or is it that they're not getting enough applicants who are African-American males?
African-Americans are not pushing it enough. They need to push it. They need to push it enough.
What do you mean by that?
They need to get out there and say, look, we feel like we are underrepresented in this time. And I hate to pigeonhole, I hate to think, that okay, yeah, we gotta have a black person just because the EEOC says we have to have a black person in this job, or I would like for stations to see the need without anybody telling them that you need to do this. Mm-hmm. See the need. Look at the stories that you're covering. Look at what's important to people out there.
Isn't part of the challenge today, and I'll give you personal opinion here, that they're not looking at the stories they're covering. They're just churning out a product,
right,
to fill a hole.
Yeah, you put everything in a meat. You put everything in the meat grinder, and you turn the grinder, and what comes out is what you see at 6 and 11.
From staffing, so they're looking for the least inexpensive way to not only produce content but to repurpose content.
Right, right.
And so that limits opportunities for a lot of people.
I've seen all this stuff about, it's time to get rid of the EEOC, equal opportunity employment. We need to get rid of that. That's an old program. It's lived its usefulness and it's outlived its usefulness. So let's just get rid of it. I am a product of equal opportunity employment. I don't think I would have been considered for any of the jobs that I was hired for in the 70s and 80s and perhaps even the 90s without the EEOC. There is a need for that still. Mm-hmm. There is a need for that just to keep a check and balance system on what's going on, because you've got to do that. Otherwise, it loses focus. And when it loses focus, it gets blurry and nobody can see why you have it. All of a sudden, you'll look back one day and say, why do we have that? We don't need to have that. Let's save some money and do it the way it was done years and years ago. And that is a disservice to your audience.
Where do you think you'd be if the EEOC opportunities hadn't been there?
I would have taken over my father's business, which was a rug cleaning business in Kingsport, Tennessee, and I would still be up there. I had to leave Tri-Cities to go into the business that I picked as a profession, because back then, African Americans weren't considered as anchors and reporters and those kinds of jobs. I could not have done that up there back then.
And I don't want to go backwards, but you bring up a point. What is that like growing up, knowing that you're not going to be considered for what your chosen profession is just because of the color of your skin?
My feeling was I was going to go somewhere where it didn't make any difference. And it didn't make any difference in Chattanooga. It didn't make any difference of all places in the world. Are you kidding me? Knoxville, Tennessee, East Tennessee, like we're one step away from the heart of Dixie, and I just decided if I can do it in Knoxville, I'm going to do it in Knoxville. I would have stayed in Knoxville. I would have stayed there after this PM Magazine thing that I know you want to talk about.
Yeah, when you get to PM Magazine, and quite frankly, we're going to gloss over Ohio because we got to get back to Chattanooga.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, because I had 25 years in Chattanooga. I only had 10 years in Ohio.
Yeah. So PM Magazine comes along, and that really establishes you as a personality. Just talk about the PM Magazine concept and how big it got to be for those 5-10 years.
Oh, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
It was a 3-year vacation.
Yeah.
Especially if you like doing it, you went out and you looked for those kinds of off-the-wall stories.
Which you really became to specialize in.
Oh, my
You're a great feature reporter.
Oh, geez. You know what started that? And again, I got to go back to WATE. I got to go back to, of course, PM Magazine. We had the show. WATE did. But what establishes you in a particular profession or a particular way of doing your job. Back when I was at UT, one of the first stories I did at UT was a snow story. It snowed like 10, 20 inches in Knoxville, all of East Tennessee, blanketed with snow. Back then, we only had a 6 and 11 o'clock show, so we only had to fit content, within like 15 minutes. So they're like, we need to, why don't we do a story on snow sculpture? Just send somebody out, let them get snow sculpture, and we put music or whatever, let them describe that or talk to the people who built it or, something like that. So I was doing that story. And we were riding around. We were getting the typical snowmen, the baseball players, that had the arm up. They glossed the ice over, and made an arm out of it. I found a snow toilet. Oh, yes. And with everything that picture paints. This was an actual snow toilet that rose about 5 feet above the ground. It was shaped perfectly. It was on the interstate. It was on Interstate 75 north of Knoxville, north of just before you got to the Norris exit, sitting in a field beside the interstate, beside the fence that follows the interstate. It was sitting there. And I did what we call a stand-up. An intro, or this would have been an outro. And I was sitting on this snow toilet with my legs crossed, holding the microphone, talking about it. And then I tossed back. To this day, this was like 50 years ago. To this day, there are people that still remember that.
I bet.
I still hear about that. My granddaddy watched you on that snow toilet, and he about fell out of his chair. He laughed about that every time he thought about it.
All right, I'm going to make you do this. PM Magazine, Calvin.
That moved me into something like PM Magazine. That opened the door.
Nice transition there.
Yeah, it's like that story. He can do those kinds of stories because those kinds of stories are what people are going to. It's water cooler talk. It's what they're going to talk about at the water cooler the next day.
So what was PM Magazine?
PM Magazine was a collection of stories that were done and collected by a national office in San Francisco. It was Group W Productions, Westinghouse Broadcasting. They were syndicated to 160 stations around the country. And Knoxville had it. Lexington had it. Nashville had it.
I know Memphis had it.
Memphis had it. Atlanta had it. Charlotte had it. Those were the big market stations. Cincinnati. Everybody had PM Magazine, just about. And we swapped stories. We sent stories around to each other.
So the concept, the format was syndicated, but each market had a local personality team.
Right.
A male and a female.
Right. And here we go with another first. I was the first African-American male to do that kind of show. And I had a white female. And the national office in San Francisco was a little worried about that. They were worried, how's that going to come across? Because all they had was white men and black women.
Right.
They didn't have a black man and a white woman. So, here we go with the race thing again. They sent somebody from the national office to Knoxville to watch us.
Really?
To see how we did it, to see how we could do that, to see how we could get over that invisible barrier that was out, that they perceived to be out there.
And I would imagine that never crossed your mind as
Not one bit. But May K. Beeler and I sat down the first time we were together, and we just played off each other like people thought we were married. We would throw the scripts out the window and just start ad-libbing with each other about stuff, like the fact that I was getting bald, the fact that she was tanning, and I was too, but you had to really look for it, and it just innocent stuff.
Yeah. You were just focused on doing your jobs and building a relationship with your coworker.
And the people.
Yeah.
And building that relationship with people. Yeah. And they loved it.
Yeah.
They loved it. I mean, it was great. Like I said, it was a 4-year vacation.
3 years of PM Magazine?
4 years. 4 years. Actually, yeah. Because I started PM a little early. I started it like 8 months before it actually went on the air because we had to get ready for it. We had to build stories.
There's a lot to put in a television and show on the air.
Yeah, so they took me off the air as a 6 o'clock anchor in Knoxville so I could start working on PM Magazine in 1980.
And when it went away, where did you go?
Broke my heart. I went to Carolina for about a year and got on at a Taft Broadcasting. Mm-hmm. And I'd heard about I grew up, hey, I'm a child of TV. I know all about Taft Television and Radio, one of the best companies out there. You want to work for a company like Taft Television and Radio. You just do. They
had many
good
exist
stations
like that today.
Yeah, they had good stations. They were in good cities. They were a great company. They loved their workers. They wanted you to stay. They didn't want you to leave. They would find ways to keep you. Mm-hmm. All of their people had been there for like 30 and 40 years, and they were comfortable in their cities, in their areas. And I got on there and got a chance to move to Columbus, Ohio. Again, here we go pigeonholing. They hired me to do consumer reporting in 1985. They hired me to do consumer reporting. And we had this idea about doing PM Magazine kind of consumer report where you get involved.
Yeah.
You step into the story. The person that's having the problem, you put yourself in their shoes and you walk a mile in their shoes to know what they're feeling like. And if you felt like yelling at the person who wrecked your roof, that put a bad roof on and didn't come back to clean up, you got to yell at them. Well, that was me. I would get to yell at people for not doing what they were supposed to do to fix this lady's house. She hired you. She paid money. She paid good money. You don't have a warranty or something?
You became their advocate.
Exactly. That was easy for me to do.
So basically, Call Calvin was birthed in Columbus, Ohio.
It started there. They had 6 on your side.
Yeah. How did that get you back to Chattanooga? And I'm jumping ahead because we're running out of time.
I told you I'd talk your off. I was hired to come back to Chattanooga, a city that I knew. And I knew more about the city than some of the reporters they had on staff. And when I got back, Jim Church, the news director, says, look, we want you to do this consumer watch thing down here, just like you did it in Columbus. Don't change a thing. Do it just like that. And we'll give you free rein to do whatever you want to do. Richard Sims was the newsroom manager. Mm-hmm. He sat me down that very first day. He says, okay, here's what we're going to do. You need an identity. Because 3 on your side at WRCB was real good. Tamara Lister had made that into a household word. And Richard said, we're going to try to take that franchise away from them. And we're going to do it based on you, your personality, and we're going to throw some things your way. You pick those things up and you run with them. One of the things they threw at me was a phone number. Richard said, we've already checked, and we can get the number 622-5846. And I said, well, what's so special about that number? He says, look at it on the phone. 6 Calvin. He said, that's a clincher for us. We're going to make Consumer Watch, and then we're going to come up with a catchphrase. For you, it's going to be call Calvin. Whatever you do, if you're having a problem, call Calvin. And that was on everybody's lips around here. And they let me alone. They let me do the stories I wanted to do.
What year did this start?
This started in 1992.
So 92, you start consumer reporting and becoming the advocate and being that guy with a photographer behind you banging on the door saying, why did you take this poor old woman's money to ruin her driveway?
And within 5 months after I got here, they made me the noon co-anchor.
Yeah.
And then eventually they added 5:30 onto that. And then I was doing all of that and consumer. Well, that kind of, it kept me busy is what I ended up taking a lot of work home because of that, and working Sundays to try to get caught up. But over the years, I was doing, the 5:30 and the noon and consumer. Bob, he became sick, and they moved me into his position. And I was never promoted. They just moved me into it without a lot of fanfare. I realized now, probably because they didn't want people to be turned off by the fact that Bob wasn't there anymore, that we all knew that he wasn't coming back. We knew that, and we'd accepted that. And we just kind of eased people into that.
I think that's a very insightful way to look at that, because over the years, you learn that viewers really grow an attachment to someone, and those goodbyes are hard. And if you look at when people leave a television station, the ones that leave abruptly, viewers are a bit ticked off.
Oh yeah, well they're mad. They're not ready to watch you ever again.
Right.
And they'll tell you to your face, you don't have so and so anymore, and so I just stopped watching you. And you don't want to really, in this fragile market that we have now, you don't want to do that to people.
I can tell you from a personal perspective, you brought a lot of stability to News Channel 9. As a familiar face, a face people liked, and they could count on it being there.
Yeah, and of course I always downplay stuff like that, because I like to think it's not me, it's the content. It's what we're giving you, it's what we're telling you, it's what we're helping you with. You need the weather, but I always think that I'm just the vessel. I'm just the pitcher that's got all the water. I've got the Kool-Aid is all in there, and I'm just pouring it out for you.
We can do a whole other episode on just Chattanooga, and I hate that we're running out of time on this, but I want to touch on a couple things before we finish up.
My gosh, where is TV going?
Yeah, well, that's a big one.
Where is it going? I don't know. I don't know. And that's scary.
Yeah.
That's scary for somebody who's done it the same way. And I've told you as a boss, change is not necessarily good.
Yeah. I
hate change.
I just think we've had a confluence of things that have affected local broadcasting. Obviously the internet has. Local broadcasting was a gatekeeper. It verified all the information and controlled what went out to make sure it was true. But it also prevented a lot of people from having a voice because you were the gatekeeper. But the internet changed that, and then
you gotta have some change. You gotta have that because the industry changes. The way we do things.
You have to progress.
Equipment changes, and you have to adjust to it.
But I think probably the most detrimental thing to broadcasting has been consolidation.
I was going to say it for you, that we've got too many out-of-town companies coming in thinking that they know this area, and all they know, they're bean counters. Well, we're going to save money here. We're going to cut this job out here. We're going to do this here, and that's going to make our bottom line higher. So
and it's okay if there's out-of-town companies if they allow local management to be a local station.
It's not okay. I'm sorry. I'm dead set against it. We need to have local companies owning local TV stations. Now, that takes away a lot of your clout with the network because you don't have something. Well, I've got all these other ABC stations, that are in my portfolio here, and so we're actually bargaining for them too. When in fact you're basically bargaining for Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Well, yeah.
And they don't like that.
I found that out really quick when we were bought, when Channel 9 was bought back in 2012 by a very, 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 very large broadcasting company. We used to make all our local programming decisions. I got a call from a syndicator one day and said, hey, we're really excited. We're going to have, and I forget what the show was, Queen Latifah on your air. I said, well, I didn't buy Queen Latifah. Oh, corporate bought it. You're going to get it.
Yeah, and then it's like, okay, so, did corporate tell you when we were going to run it?
Yeah, well, yeah, I asked all those questions, and then I made the mistake of calling the program person at corporate and saying, you don't make the decisions, I make the decisions. Then I got a call from the director of programming and said, no. No.
Those decisions are being made for you.
Yes.
And that has not necessarily been a good thing, especially for people who want to think for themselves. You know the market better than they do. Like I say, the bean counters, all they know are the dollar bills. I'm afraid for this business. 10 years from now, it's not going to be the same as we grew up to know it, which was the best way to run it.
Well, and I think you have to look at two models. You got to look at the newspaper model, which has its issues and it's still transitioning. But I look at the radio model. Radio was king.
Oh, yeah.
Radio was king until television came along. But you know what? Radio's been through a lot of the same changes. And there's still local independent operators able to do what they want to do or what they know to do in their community. So I think that holds out hope.
We better talk bridges before we run out of time.
Yeah, before we run out of time, because we're running out.
We're way out of time now.
Talk about your passionate pursuit of photographing bridges, and then I need to get to the last question.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, bridges. I tell you what, I grew up, and the only way I can talk about bridges is to tell the story of how I became influenced by them. When I was growing up on the farm in Middle Tennessee, in Marshall County, my grandmother's farm was on one side of the river. My uncle's farm, my favorite uncle, his farm was on the other side. To get between those two farms, you had to cross the river. There was a steel truss bridge on that river. It was the Duck River on the Henry Horton Highway, US 31A, south of Nashville. And when I was a kid, there's nothing like being in the back of a pickup truck and you're 6, 7 years old and you're riding along with your cousins, and the wind is blowing and you're just having this great time going back and forth between
But you can't
farms.
do that today.
No. But there's nothing like doing that. And then all of a sudden, these steel beams start coming across your head, and you're looking up, and oh my goodness, what are we in? Are we in a tunnel? I fell in love with the first steel truss bridge there at that point at 10 years old. And I've been in love with them ever since. There is something about that serene, elegant, tranquil mass of steel that is comforting. That bridge has more than likely been there for 100 years. If you leave it alone and nature doesn't knock the piers out from underneath it, it will be there for another 100 years. There's something that's just calming about it.
So how do you take that to what you're doing today? What is it you're doing?
I'm photographing bridges before they disappear,
and
before they get
you're
gone.
documenting them, giving the history.
I'm giving their history.
Have you written a book about it?
I've done 3 coffee table books so far. I love bridgesandtunnels.com.
I love bridges and tunnels.
I love bridgesandtunnels.com. Just run it all together. That's where I am.
Is this mainly the Southeast, or is it?
Mostly in the Southeast, simply because the Southeast is a day trip.
What do you look for in a bridge? Is it just their history? Is it the structure? Is it where it is?
It's a little bit of everything, because every bridge has a story. Every bridge has a reason for being where it is. How it brought communities together, how it brought farmers together, taking produce to market, going to church. You cross this bridge because the little church on the hill is, things like that.
Is that some way your connection to your love of bridges is with your connection of connecting people as you were doing stories? You know,
In a way, there is a connection. There is a connection there.
You're kind of the bridge. You know, you were the bridge for all those years of telling the story and connecting it to people on the air.
People build bridges. And I'm not just talking about physical bridges, but they build relationships. And they do that in some ways with this big steel thing between two shores.
Yeah.
That bridges a gap in their lives. You know, I mean, but there's something that is so calming about it, that it's so serene. These elegant structures standing up against, and I wax poetic here because it just fits.
Yeah, there's two things we probably need to do. Well, three is do another podcast where we can talk about bridges and we could talk more about the television industry. Mm-hmm. But I do need to get to the last question.
Okay. All right.
And before I get to that question, I want to remind our listeners who makes all this possible. And that's the Tennessee Valley Authority. So thank you, TVA, for sponsoring My Morning Cup. Follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service, and visit TVA.com/do-good-here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. And if you want to get Calvin's book, it's ilovebridgesandtunnels.com.
Right. Now, that's got my email address on it. And by the way, TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, that was my beat.
Was it?
When I was in Knoxville at WATE.
Yeah.
I know everything about TVA, everything that has ever been written about TVA, everything that TVA has ever done.
Well, they got a few bridges in their history, too.
Yeah, they actually built bridges.
Yeah.
Out here, the Chickamauga Dam, that bridge was built by TVA when they put the dam in.
Yeah, was it Thrasher Bridge?
Yeah, Thrasher.
All right, last question for you. What would you tell your 25-year-old self is important for a happy life?
Find something that you like. Find something that gives you purpose. Find something in your life that other people can learn from, and make that the cornerstone of how you communicate. I couldn't think of being a good communicator without remembering how bridges do that. Every time I go to a bridge, it's like I'm with an old friend. I can hear it, I can feel it, I can put my hands on it, I can feel it vibrating when a car or a truck rolls across it. And that helps me communicate to people because I feel what you feel. I understand that. I understand your problem. I can step into your problem and be you. And I can solve it probably better than you can because you tried to solve that problem and couldn't. Mm-hmm. I can solve it by using a different approach. You build a bridge, basically, to solve problems.
That's a great analogy, Calvin. And much like bridges, you bring people together. So thank you for being here.
I don't know that I do it. I sometimes it's just the concept. It's not me. I'm just the vessel. I'm just the cup that the Kool-Aid is in.
Your entire career. Thanks so much for doing this.
Good to be here.
Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Consta Media Advisors. If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.